Hello and welcome to my channel. So today we are going to be drawing and painting this gorgeous little bird. It's a little kingfisher. So they've got actually super long beaks. So I'm going to start by drawing his little head. Now his beak is the same length as his head. I apologise if you can hear the saw in the background. My husband's out trimming trees because we've got a couple of trees that have got dead branches that he's just tidying up. So I apologise for that background noise if you can hear that. So now I'm just going to do his beak. So his head and his beak are the same length, and he's got quite a squared off head. His little chin comes down there. I'll just start by, I'll draw him in parts. So that's sort of roughly the shape. Then his head and his beak are the same length as his body. Hang on, head and his beak, same length as his body. So I go down to below his head and I'll mark a little line there so I know where his body ends. And then there's just a little tiny tail at the bottom. So I'll come down here and draw his little body down there. And his back comes down like that. So I'm just getting his shapes in as we speak, and then I'm going to draw his little tail at the bottom, and he's only got a tiny little tail. And he's just got a simple branch under him, so I'm just going to pretty much keep it the same as the reference picture. You can see his little leg just down here, and I wanted to do this little bird because I loved his little bright colours. And I'm going to use my Sennelier watercolours today because I think they've got beautiful tones that will suit this little bird quite well. Let's do his little claw coming right around there. You can just see the other little toe out the back there, but I'm not going to worry about that just yet. Now I can start to add some detail. So I'm going to add his eye there. He's sort of got an oval eye. You can see the reflection of light on it there. His beak comes down and under his eye, and then back towards the beak again. I can make his head a little bit rounder because he does have quite a round little head at the top. And you can see I'm gonna mark in where the colours change on his feathers, because it just makes life a little bit easier to keep aligned where I want it, like that. And he's also got a greeny teal piece coming down there, and then his wing is tucked up here and it goes almost down to his bottom, and then he's got sort of longer feathers that go down over his back a little bit. And you can just see the ones on the other side as well. His tail's probably a fraction longer than I've drawn it in, so I'll add a few little longer feathers under there, like that. Then he's got beautiful orange underneath feathers. And I reckon that's pretty much where I want it. All the details are where I want it. So just looking at that little reference that I'll pop up in the left-hand side of the screen on it. Going to tidy up this line on the bottom of his beak like that. And I'm not going to do a background, I'm just going to have him just on the paper as normal. Come back like that. Okay, I'm going to leave that as a sketch. I might take the branch out the other side a little bit just to give it some symmetry, like that. Righto. Quite happy with that. So now I'm going to start with the colour, and I'm using my Sennelier colours, and I'm going to start with my turquoise green. It's a lovely turquoisey colour. Just got to get a bit onto my brush and onto my palette so you can see that there. That's a blue green. It's a lovely blue green. I'm going to add quite a bit of water to it, and I'm just going to start by blocking in the big bulk areas of colour And I'm using Bockingford watercolour paper today. I tried it yesterday actually, and I really enjoyed using it. It's quite a lovely colour. So I'm going to come around his eye, onto the back of his head, and down. And then, I'm just anywhere I can see this colour, I'm going to add this base layer of this beautiful turquoise blue or turquoise green. What is it? It says turquoise green. It's turquoise green. Okay. And I'll take that all the way down his wing. So I'll go a bit more on my brush and just sweep that down his wing like that. And the less water I add to this pigment, the darker the tone will be, or the stronger the colour will be. So I don't need to change the pigment to get the darker bits. I just add less water to the paint, and that will darken it up enough for me. So you can see a little spot of orange on his back there. So I'm just going to go leave a little gap, go around that, come down onto his wings, do those feathers. They're actually brown, but I can go over those. I can put the green in there first. It's not a problem. Okay, so that's his green areas pretty much blocked in. I'm going to go back to my turquoise now and get less paint, more pigment. And I'm just going to drop in a couple of little, while it's still damp, drop in some darker areas and let that flow around, because you can see he's got a couple of quite dark or much darker areas, stronger toned areas than, but while it's still wet, I can drop that paint in and it'll flow around and blend itself and do its thing, which is what watercolour does best. Then I'll let it dry. I'll just pop in some little feathery textures that I can see on the reference. And I got the reference from Unsplash, which is a royalty-free reference site. Again, I'm just going to drop some patterns in, just where the patterns are going to be on this little bird. And I'll take this down his back and onto his tail. As you see, he has a couple of darker feathers down there. All right, I am going to let him dry a little bit now. And I'm going to go onto his tummy. And for his tummy, he's quite a golden brown. So I'm thinking I might go a bit of golden ochre. Have a look at the gold ochre. Whoops, need to get a bit more on my brush. Have a look at the gold ochre and see what it, that's pretty close. That's a pretty close sort of colour to what I want. So I'm going to dilute that for the first layer. And I'm going to go in. I'm not going to touch near the blue. I'm going to leave a little tiny gap around the blue, because I want to show you it in real time. So I'm not going to go away, let it dry, and I'll just work around things. And I can go in closer to the edges when that top layer dries, and it dries pretty quick. It's not a cold day here today. It'll dry reasonably fast. I'll just take that right round. Change the shape of his little belly there a little bit. I've made his belly a little bit deep there, so I'll just change the shape of that a fraction. Then come down. All right, I'm happy with that. I'm going to work on his beak a little bit now, and his beak is grey, so I'm going to use burnt umber and cobalt blue to make a natural looking grey. And I'm going to dilute that quite a lot. So burnt umber, cobalt blue makes that browny grey. I don't know if you can see that there, that browny grey. And I'm just going to pop that on for the first layer of the beak. I'm going to leave little shimmers of lighter paper, because he does have reflections. Again, I'm staying away from that wet paint. And I'm just working around. I'll do the bottom part of the beak like that. And I just left a little glimmer of the white paper up the top, just so that you can see that that'll be a reflection. And I can go into the center of his eye, again staying away from that green. I don't want to get that to blend in together. And I'm just going to add his iris on his eye. Just block that in a little bit. The bottom blue's nearly dry. It's nearly dry, and the brown on his tummy's nearly dry. So I'm actually going to go in with a slightly bit more yellow, gold ochre, I think it is. Was it brown ochre? It is gold ochre. Going in with a bit more gold ochre, just with less water, more pigment, just to darken up or strengthen up. I can go closer to his little wings now because that blue's dried. Just tuck that right into that wing. There we go. And you can see that adds a nice stronger tone. I'll go under his tail feathers here. He's got quite a bit dark bit there. And I can also go in with a little bit of burnt sienna, which is a very similar, a little bit more red to it. A very similar sort of gold colour, but with a little bit more red. And I'm just going to add that into the deepest sort of the areas you can see that darker bit, darker brown. It's also, I can't go up there because that's still damp. He's got a little pipet of this goldy brown on the top of his head as well, but I'll have to leave that till last. And I'll leave the underneath of his belly lighter just there. Now I can go back into my gold ochre. And I've got it, because this is all, it's dried enough now that I can bring in this bit of gold. Very diluted under his eye. Stay away from that top bit a little bit. I've got to leave the gap of white at the back of his cheek. And I'm going to clean my brush, take the excess moisture out of it, and absorb that little puddle of water right there. Because there's a little bit too much water sitting there. So I'll just absorb that like that. Lift that little puddle out. Then go back into my gold ochre and just pop a little bit in that part in front of the eye, like that. I can take it around the bottom of the eye, absorb up that little puddle, like that. Okay, I'm happy with that. Just going to leave that little bit of white under there. Now I'm going to let all that dry for a little bit, and I'm going to go straight onto his branch that he's sitting on, and I'm going to use yellow ochre. But first I'm going to wet the branch. So I'm going to clean my brush, and I'm using a size 6 watercolour brush, a round watercolour brush. So I'm just going to wet the stick that he's sitting on, and then I'm going to drop the yellow ochre in and let it flow. And that will do its thing. Like that. Okay, and I'm going to drop a little bit of burnt umber, just a touch, while it's still very wet. Not that much, got a bit too much on my brush. Little bit while it's still very wet, and let that flow around, and that will help to add like a woody grain. I don't want it everywhere. I just want it to look like the bark. The bark's just slightly different colours. And see, that gives you a lovely effect. Right, I'm going to leave that to dry. So now I'm going to go back. His wing's dried enough, but I can go back in now with a little bit more turquoise. And I'm also got a little bit more turquoise, less water, more pigment. And I'm going to add a little bit more blue to it. So I'm going to add a little bit of cobalt to that. Little touch of cobalt blue just to strengthen that blue, just a fraction. Because I want it slightly darker. Just take it in around that edge. And I can start to add these little flecks. You see he's got little flecks in his feathers. Patterns on the feathers. So I'm going to draw those in, just that. So that's the cobalt mixed with the teal. And I can take that down, and you see that sort of sheets down onto his back. He's got long, soft looking feathers coming down there. So I'll just suggest those coming in like that. And I'm going to get some more of that. Mix some more of that up. I need to get a bit more on my brush. Not quite enough on there. Like that, get a bit more on my palette. Mix that up. Okay, and then I can go down here onto his wings and add in just the little end texture bits. The shapes of his feathers. Just suggesting the shapes of them now. I'm going to wet my brush and I'm just going to drag that up a little bit so they're not just hard lines. I want them to be soft. So I'm using the side of my brush and sort of just tweaking it up like that, just to create the suggestions of those little feathers. I don't want exact, it doesn't have to be exact. So now I can go, I'm going to add a little bit of this darker blue, bluey green, just to the bottoms of these little feathers here. I'm going to add a little bit of that onto there. Now I'm going to go back onto the top of his head. It's still a little bit damp, but I can do some of them. I'm just going to add some of these little lines. He's got some brown on there as well, so I'll add a little bit of brown towards the end. I can add that texture in. And that goes around to the side of his eye, to his eyes, and I'll add a little bit of that mixture there. And I don't want it to be too dark. I'm just going to keep it sort of subtle. And you can see how soft these Sennelier paints are. So soft and beautiful. They're delicate. They're really a delicate layering watercolour. And I'm going to drop in some Payne's Grey into this iris on his eye, quite diluted. Just take that around the edges of his eye like that. And I've got to add a little bit more around his beak as well. So I'm going to drop that in, let that blend a little bit. Doesn't matter if it blends in with that gold a little bit. And I'm going to add that on the bottom of his beak, quite diluted. And the Sennelier Payne's Grey is lovely. It's a really soft grey. I really enjoy it. And again, I can see that there's like a darker line up here, going up to his face on his beak. A bit there, like that. Okay, starting to look right. I'm going to take that little bit of grey around the eye a little bit there. There we go. Okay, so now I'm going to do his little feet, and he's got bright orange feet. He's got beautiful little bright orange feet. So I'm going to use my Sennelier orange. So I'll get that onto my palette, and because that branch is nearly dry now, and I'm just going to drop in that Sennelier orange around his little leg, around his foot, and I'll do his little toes in a second. But that's just about that. So I'm happy with that. I'm going to add a little bit more detail onto his head, but I'm going to use a bit of ultramarine. I'm not going to use a brown. I'm going to use a little touch of ultramarine just to strengthen the contrast, like that, and take that around the front of his little face, like that. And I'm going to add that, a little bit of that in very sort of feathery textures around there, and a little touch of it onto the bottom of his wing. All right, let's have a look. What else have we got? I'm going to pop a little bit down here, a little bit onto the bottom of his wing. So now I'm going to add the little brown tips to the bottoms of his wings, and I'm going to use actually a sepia. I'm going to use a sepia. It just looks like, so just a warmer sort of a browny tone. So, and sepia is just lovely, the Sennelier sepia. So I'll add a little bit of that. I'm also going to pop a little bit of that sepia onto his beak, because it's just a nice, slightly different tone. It's got a little bit of a brown tinge to it. And I can add that actually in and around the bottom of his eye as well. I'm going to go back onto his pupil. I've got to do his little claws too, and I'll use sepia for those as well. I'll use sepia for his toes. I won't make them jet black. So his little claw goes there and a little claw there. I'll go back onto his eye. I'm going to just add a little bit more pigment to that just to darken up the front part of his eye. There we go. Quite happy with that. So that's a fun little watercolour sketch. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'd love it if you would click like and subscribe, click on the bell icon. That way you'll be notified when I release a new video. So yeah, thank you for watching. Yeah, I will be back tomorrow. Have an awesome day and I'll see you next video. Okie doke. Bye.